be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So continuing our series on Omega level mutants, what I wanted to do here is focus on the powers of Quintin Quire, also known as Kid Omega. Created by Grant Morrison and appearing for the first time in New X-Men number 134, from his initial appearance, while Quintin was stated to be an Omega level mutant, this was not designed to be a focal point of his character, nor was he designed to be a long-term member of the Xavier Institute. Instead, his appearance actually came out of Morrison's desire to reshape the X-Men team under the direction of Editor-in-Chief Joe Quesada as part of the Revolution relaunch. Because Quesada wanted to ensure that the stories of Marvel maintained their classical themes, but still resonated with the young readers of their target audience, under Morrison, the X-Men team maintained its classical roots of fighting against mutant oppression, but the stories were written to allow for a wholesale expansion of the mutant concept, giving way to a more in-depth look into not just how the X-Men functioned as part of the larger superhero community, but the goings-on of the struggles of each team member, as well as the larger issues facing the Xavier School. To this end, Quintin represented the generation of readers born in 1995 and leading up to the 2000s who found themselves rebellious due to exposure to a combination of technology and blooming social media by way of MySpace and other websites. As a result, and according to the in-comic classification offered by Xavier, Quintin's powers were comprised of telepathy with unrealized Omega-level potential. In addition to this, while Quintin was not a social outcast in the traditional sense, he did form an early jealousy towards a fellow student named Slick, as well as a crush on Sophie of the Stepford Cuckoos. Now again, this represented the coming-of-age struggles between those trying to fit in and those who had already found their place, but offers the adjustment of young mutants being able to use their powers as a means to even the playing field. At the same time, Quintin's arrival coincided with his birthday, during which time he received a call informing him that he was actually adopted, with no real information forthcoming on who his actual parents were. This revelation, combined with Sophie refusing to notice him and his failure to live up to the image of what other students considered to be cool, sent Quintin into a state of borderline madness. Adopting the physical appearance of a mutant overlord as it had been described in an op-ed news piece, which was written by Bolivar Trask some years earlier, Quintin also began to experiment with Kick, the street name for a drug known as hypercortisone D, which boosted the powers of those who used it by a factor of 5. Now, something to point out here is that this bit of information originally existed as a source of contention among fans regarding whether Quintin was actually an Omega-level mutant, or had simply elevated himself to that status through artificial means, where this would be expanded on with Greg Pak's story Phoenix Endsong, and Kick itself would later be revealed to contain the essence of the entity Sublime. The fact remained that Quintin's mutant powers of telepathy were boosted to the point that he exceeded those of both Charles Xavier and Emma Frost. Christening himself Kid Omega and coming to the conclusion that Xavier's dream of a peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants was nonsense, Quintin formed a group called the Omegas who, alongside himself, began the process of avenging mutants who had been killed by humans in a fashion that fell almost directly in line with Magneto's ideals. In addition to this, with the Xavier Institute hosting an open doors policy for family members who look to spend time with their children, Quintin and the Omegas launched a riot and took over the Institute, subduing Xavier with a helmet that blocked his telepathic abilities. While the riot of Quintin was quelled by way of Xavier's helmet being removed and the Stepford Cuckoos using Kick alongside Cerebra to enhance their hive mind telepathic powers, with Grant Morrison having already introduced secondary mutations, Quintin was effectively written out of the Marvel landscape when his mutation evolved due to his use of Kick, transforming him into a pure state of energy. That said, the notion of Quintin Quire becoming an Omega-level mutant organically came with Phoenix Endsong. Written by Greg Pak as a send-off to Jean Grey, the story also served the purpose of providing a means to tie up loose ends for both her character and the rest of the X-Men team. To sidetrack here, where Morrison was working to revamp the team for modern readers, the other half of this equation was also removing characters who, for lack of a better word, had run their course. With the case of Jean Grey, following the original Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas under Claremont, her character had quite literally fallen to the wayside due to various writers being unable to keep her compelling in the eyes of fans while keeping from rehashing the work of Claremont. And so as part of his larger vision, Morrison effectively wrote Jean Grey out of Marvel Comics in 2 phases, beginning with the E is for Extinction event, coming out as Morrison's first story arc with New X-Men, following Cassandra Nova's massacre of 16 million mutants on the island of Genosha, after which she infiltrated the Shi'ar Empire while posing as Xavier. Jean Grey was left to run the Xavier Institute on her own as the head mistress. Using this as a means to create a rift in the relationship between Jean and Cyclops, Morrison placed Emma Frost as a wedge between the two that effectively destroyed their relationship when Jean walked in on Cyclops having a psychic affair with Emma, who was posing as Jean. Following this, the final blow came with the introduction of Quintin Quire, a mutant under the influence of Sublime and posing as Magneto for the purpose of creating chaos within the mutant community and presenting mutants as a legitimate threat to humanity as opposed to a peaceful race. While the X-Men and Zorn's own followers doubted his claim to be the real Magneto, in an effort to prove his claims, a fight was instigated in New York, during which time Zorn killed Jean Grey using an electromagnetic pulse that disrupted the electrons in her brain. Now, where Jean largely remained absent following the conclusion of Morrison's run, because his final story concluded with the arc Here Comes Tomorrow, which featured Jean Grey from the future, with Chuck Austen doing little to answer questions as to why Jean appeared in the future despite having been killed, the writing duties fell to Greg Pak, who used Endsong to both clear up these questions and others, including what happened to Quentin after transforming into a pure state of energy. Now, with this bit of storytelling, Greg Pak removed the kick aspect of Quentin's powers and elevated him to being a full-fledged Omega-level mutant. With Endsong centering on the Shi'ar Empire resurrecting the Phoenix Force, the entity traveled back to Earth in an effort to locate Jean due to the fact that she was destined to become one with the entity. Stumbling across Quintin Quire, Greg Pak established that Quentin was an Omega-level telepath, making him a potential host for the Phoenix Force. While Quentin was not chosen, the side effect of his exposure to the Phoenix Force drove him to rematerialize his own body, effectively resurrecting himself. Now, while this does not seem like a normal feat of telepathy, with Uncanny X-Men number 282 by John Byrne titled His Name is Bishop, the first appearance of Lucas Bishop in Marvel Comics came with the introduction of mind transference, or the ability for telepaths to either reconstitute their own bodies or transfer their minds into other host bodies. Where this is usually used as a plot device designed to allow powerful telepaths to be raised from the dead, the fact remains that it does have precedence in Marvel Comics and was used on several occasions prior to Greg Pak's story. But regardless, with Quentin being confirmed as a possible host for the Phoenix Force, because only telepaths of the highest cosmic order are capable of this, Greg Pak had effectively offered up the idea that Quentin was Omega level and well beyond the capabilities of all known telepaths, with the exception of Jean Grey. As a result of this, and while the story saw Quentin returning to his non-corporeal form, the work of Pak also introduced the notion of Quentin possessing telekinesis well beyond some of Marvel's most powerful villains and heroes, including Apocalypse, Nate Gray, Vulcan, Psylocke, and Mr. Sinister. Now, following Greg Pak's story, various writers of the X-Men began spinning out a series of stories that involved Quentin Quire and depicted him as an Omega-level force who remained unchallenged with the exception of Cosmic Entities and Franklin Richards. Where Quentin remained largely absent from Marvel Comics for around 6 years, in 2011, under the writing of Jason Aaron and Kieran Gillen, he returned to the Marvel landscape in physical form during the Schism event. Continuing the fallout from 2004's House of M, which reduced the mutant population to 198, Schism initially focused on the introduction of Cade Kilgore. Born as a human with gifted intelligence that rivals some of Marvel's most intelligent heroes, Cade Kilgore had freed Quentin Quire, using Quentin as a means for Cade to kill his own father and overtake the Hellfire Club. Using his considerable resources and working alongside Quentin Quire, the two laid waste to the X-Men, with both Wolverine and Cyclops taking different stances on how Cade and Quentin should be handled. Where this leads to a schism within the team, allowing Wolverine to form the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning in Westchester, New York. Because the powers of Quentin were so extreme, instead of allowing him to be taken prisoner by Captain America and the Avengers, Wolverine petitioned Steve Rogers to allow him to take Quentin under his tutelage as a student, in the hopes of both instructing Quentin on how to use his powers adequately, as well as keep the increasingly extreme measures of Cyclops from using Quentin as a means to wage war against humanity. Written by Jason Latour and coming out of Volume 2, Issue Number 1 as part of Marvel Now in 2014, Wolverine and the X-Men revealed that whether by choice or circumstance, at some point in the future, the Phoenix Force would return and seize control of Quentin Quire due to his status as an Omega-level telepath and telekinetic. Following this, where Quentin had several subsequent appearances, the most notable display of his powers came during the battle against Cyclops' school and the all-new X-Men. Taking place as a continuation of Wolverine and the X-Men Volume 2, because the methods of Cyclops had become more and more extreme, under the writing of Brian Michael Bendis, Hank McCoy had traveled into the past and retrieved the original X-Men team under the hopes that the younger Cyclops would talk sense into his older self, where this would set the stage for the events of Avengers vs. X-Men and the return of the Phoenix, with the conclusion of the Battle of the Atom storyline seeing the original X-Men team taking up residence with Cyclops at his school in the old Weapon X facility. Quentin discovered and battled the entirety of the school's inhabitants, taking everyone out with very little effort. Seeing the appearance of his future self as a host for the Phoenix Force, within the eyes of fans, if the previous displays of his powers were not enough to guarantee his position as Omega level, this did. Now while this was short-lived, because Marvel was continuing to move towards the launch of Secret Wars and the start of all new, all different Marvel, Quentin, with virtually all loose ends in terms of the mutant community, were tied up during Axis. Centering on Red Skull acquiring the minds of Charles Xavier and resurrecting the Onslaught persona, the full capacities of Quentin Quire were put to the test in his attempt to shield the X-Men and the various heroes from the mind of Red Skull, while the heroes attempted to organize a front to destroy Red Skull. Where this eventually failed and Quentin was discovered, the purpose of this bit of writing from Rick Remender served to confirm that with the exception of collective entities like Onslaught or cosmic constants like the Cosmic Entities or Franklin Richards, there was virtually no one on Earth capable of rivaling the abilities of a fully powered Quentin Quire. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and let me know how you guys feel about Quentin. Personally, he's a really good character, but I also think he occasionally falls short of good storytelling. But with that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.